Okay, we're calling to order the meeting of the Willits City Council, the regular meeting of September 26th at 6:30. And let's start with the pledge to the flag. I pledge
allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. And Kathy, would you do a roll call, please?
Yes. Councilmembers Gonzalez?
Here.
Stransky?
Yes.
Barnes?
Here.
Rodriguez? Yes. Mayor Strong?
Here. All right. So, as usual, we will start with any public comments or communications. These are generally items that are not on the regular agenda, but are within the jurisdiction of the city to deal with. And criticisms of the city and boards and so forth are allowed. And you're generally limited to 3 minutes. So if anyone would like to come forward and speak to the city council on anything. Seeing none, we will go on to public matters. The first public matter is a presentation of a proclamation to the American Association of University Women. We're postponing that item because the young women who were being honored by that item are not able to be present, so I think it'll be 2 weeks from now on the next agenda. The second one is a presentation regarding the Measure B committee, and Jen Diamond, we're going to go right to you on that and hear what's going on there.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Again, I think most people know me, Jen Diamond. For those that don't, I'm the representative from the 3rd District to the Measure B Community Committee that is looking at funding for mental health services. We meet once a month. And I first want to just commend members of the City Council that have been coming to those meetings. No other city in the county is coming to the regular meetings except Willits City Council. So I want to honor you for doing that. Also, there's more people in the audience from Willits than any other communities that come consistently, and some of them are here tonight. They're Kameroff, and many others have been coming. So what that speaks to me is just the commitment, the interest, the involvement of our community in support of mental health services. Next thing I just want to acknowledge is that what a community and a county in this case can do when we collectively vote a tax increase to support something that we believe in. And as you know, Measure B was passed recently that takes a half-cent sales tax for the first 5 years devoted just to mental health services. So if you think about it, anytime you go buy something and what you're paying for is just a half-cent on top of whatever the tax is, not your bill, but the tax on that. And what that raises, because each time we get an update on how much money has come in for the previous months from all of our tax monies. So we are raising regularly $500,000 a month. So think about that when you think about what we can do collectively when everybody gives a little bit. So I want to acknowledge that. So this meeting was somewhat unusual. As you all know, it lasted longer than the other meetings. Generally, we try to meet from 1 to 3 and keep it within 2 hours. This one ran over quite a bit, hour and a half, 45 minutes, or a half hour, 45 minutes extra, but I think it was well taken. I will just highlight some of the things that I think are particularly relevant to the council and to our community. And if you're wanting to see the whole thing, they're videoed and you can watch the whole thing. The first thing is we went over again the Kemper report, which was a report that the commission had recommended and the board of supervisors approved to really do a full needs assessment. Because as you know, some of the talk for quite some time, last couple of years, was that what we needed was a residential, what's called a TUF, which is PHF is what the acronym is, which spells for a psychiatric hospital, or what is it?
Facility.
Facility, there you go. psychiatric hospital facility. And what we said is, well, we're not sure, one, where that fits with the whole continuum of care. And secondly, what's it going to cost, where should it be, all of those issues. And some of the concerns, many of them from Willits, was that some people on the committee, or the committee as a whole, had decided that the Old Howard Hospital was the place. Some people thought that was a wonderful idea. Some people thought that was a bad idea. And some people said, well, let's see where it is and let's look at it. Well, what the Kemper report said, I want to just read to you just the last part of this, because I think it speaks to both the report itself, and it's a fairly detailed 45-page, we've been going over this, but it spells out both the overall understanding and then some specific recommendations. And as a committee, we all felt this was a really worthwhile report. It helped us. It was worth the money we paid Kemper to do. So so let me get to where I marked my place here. Sorry, thought I had it at hand. Well, you can see the problem. There's so much in here. But basically, what it was saying was that the services that we need to be comprehensive. It has to look at everything, not just one psychiatric kind of facility. Secondly, that an inpatient psychiatric facility of whatever kind is the most expensive. It's the most difficult obviously to build, to fund, and so on. So we need to look real carefully at anything that we would do in that area. On the other side, which we're reminded of, and you all should too, is that we are already spending a huge amount of money outside what we think of as the community mental health system. People are going with mental health problems to the emergency hospitals, which is a very high level of care, very expensive and not very effective for dealing psychiatric emergencies. And I talked again today of what it's like if you're in crisis, a mental health crisis, you're suicidal, and you're sitting in an emergency room locked up in a hospital unit because you're kind of going through some difficulties. The other place, as you know, where people end up who are not in the mental health system is in law enforcement, where you get a call, the police go out, the sheriffs go out. That's also a very expensive way to provide services, and it's not very effective. And the third way is we, in fact, have psychiatric hospitalization that this county already is paying for. The problem is we're sending the people who need psychiatric hospitalization outside the county. And again, that's less effective. We talked again today about why you send people out, and there were people from the community who were there. You spoke, said, my son keeps getting sent. He goes he ends up in different hospitals, different doctors, different regimes, different medications, and then he comes back into the community now separated from his family, from his community support, and so he then relapses and goes back. So there's, I think, a need for two kinds of services that the community, I think, has identified, the committee has identified. One, I'll just briefly tell you what they are. One is called a Crisis Stabilization Unit. It's also known as a CSU. And that's a 24-hour licensed facility that provides crisis stabilization for clients experiencing a mental health crisis. The program offers crisis stabilization up to 24 hours. So that's a place where police or people could come on their own or could be brought to basically get stabilized, to get checked out. And that's recommended. In addition to that, there's recommended a crisis residential facility, also called a CRF, so you got to have a glossary to know it. And that's a 24-hour licensed facility that provides alternatives to acute hospitalization. So the idea of that is to keep people who who might need care from having to go into a psychiatric hospital. For individuals experiencing an acute psychiatric episode or crisis, the length of stay is no longer than 3 months. So it would be after you would be in this crisis stabilization unit, and there's a recommendation for a specific program that was, get back to my notes here. We heard from Redwood Quality Management, who is licensed to do a lot of already county services, and they have a grant that they got for the land, and the recommendation is that some of the money from the Measure B go towards this unit. They've got the land, they are ready to go, they can start creating this, and they gave a presentation. Nothing was recommended by the committee to the board yet. We want to hear from them again, they're on the agenda. And like with everything else that the committee is, or the community committee is saying, we want to see specifics before we would recommend anything to the Board of Supervisors. So we all think this is a good idea. Mills Matheson, some of you know Dr. Matheson, he was at the meeting. He said, yes, this is a good first step. Pretty much everybody who is conversant with mental health services believes this would be a good first step, including what Kemper, who's expert, recommended.
The this that you're talking about is this Redwood group
Right.
building a, what kind of a facility?
Well, we saw the whole, some of your members of the council, they had visual of it. It would be a building that would have 3 elements to it. So 2 of them would be a unit where, you know, an ambulance could drive in or an emergency, and they would have professionals to see the person, to evaluate them. They could stay for up to 24 hours. Then the second floor on top of that would be this crisis residential unit for people that would need longer term, could just go right upstairs. And then there's a third unit that's been housed at another part of the Redwood quality management, and they would bring that there too. So there would be an integration of services in one place, and the hope would be that that would prevent a lot of potential hospitalizations, both in and people who came out of a hospital could be seen there. So that's, again, we haven't recommended that. It was discussed. Probably they will be speaking, so if you have feelings strongly for or against, or just want to hear at the next meeting, it will probably be discussed and perhaps recommended to the board that that unit be funded.
Jed, the place you referenced that would be off-site, is that for like walk-in services, or is that long-term care? Let me answer both halves. Part of it could be walk-in. You could walk into a unit like that. It's in Ukiah, it's on Orchard Street, where this is being proposed. It would also be for this short-term crisis up to 24 hours in the what's called the CSU, the Crisis Stabilization Unit, and then longer term, you know, up to 3 months potentially in the longer term upstairs. So let me tell you what I think I heard. So the first floor would be the crisis stabilization unit.
Right.
Second floor would be for acute psychiatric unit for up to 3 months.
No, that's not, just get the terms
Okay.
right.
Okay,
Yeah, it's called a crisis residential facility.
Thank you.
That's the upstairs.
And then,
Not to be confused with what we'll talk about next.
okay, and then I'll let you keep going because it sounds
Okay.
like you got it. Thank
So
you.
the third kind of major element of crisis residential is called a psychiatric health facility, or PHF. And that's a 16-bed, this is what at least the licensing is, 16-bed, 24-hour licensed acute medical facility, or non-medical facility, certified by the Department of Health Care Services. The facility provides an environment for voluntary and involuntary clients needing acute care for mental health, mental illness to receive treatment. Services provided include evaluation and stabilization of acute psychiatric crisis, 24-hour nursing care, medication monitoring, and psychiatric consultation. The average length of stay is 3 to 5 days. So
it's a short-term intensive psychiatric.
And that's for 5150 holds.
That would be, well, it could be both. It could be voluntary, or it could be somebody who is.
But if someone comes into the triage and they're examined and they don't pose a danger to themselves or other, they're not gravely disabled and can't be involuntarily housed in a PUF unit, can nonetheless be seen in this 24-hour first floor.
Exactly right. Exactly right. So in terms of inpatient psychiatric beds or need, there are two different possibilities discussed at this meeting and has been, and in the Kemper report, if you could get through all the, then remember where it was that you wanted to speak to. One possibility is that our existing hospitals in Willits and/or Ukiah, that is the new Howard Hospital, not the old one, the new one that's there now, and Ukiah Valley Medical Center. Let's see, who is there?
Jason Wells.
Yeah, Jason Wells, who's the CEO of the Howard facility, was there, and he expressed at least the feeling from Adventist Health, that runs the hospital, that they're very interested in being involved in some way with this process because they see the same problems that everybody else is seeing, that they have people who are in the hospital for medical things but really have psychiatric problems and are not being treated well, and they're disruptive and they cause problems. So one of the possibilities is that they might want to build onto their hospitals psychiatric wing that would have up to a certain number of beds that would provide psychiatric services. So that's being looked into. They're going to come, Jason is going to come at the next meeting to talk about the interest of Adventist Health. So that would be one way you could solve the problem of inpatient psychiatric beyond the short term that I described earlier. The other would be either a freestanding psychiatric hospital that was built from scratch somewhere. You buy the land and you build it. Or the other choice would be probably the old Howard Hospital that's been discussed quite a bit, and rather than build something from scratch, you would use some part of that facility that's been retooled and would be able, and that would be a possibility that could be recommended. But all of those things, as I've said, are a ways off as far as I can see. That anybody, the consensus of the committee was one, even a short-term residential like we're talking about, we want to be sure we got all the answers before we recommend it. Something as significant as an inpatient, whether it's in a hospital idea, in an existing hospital, or would be a recommendation to build or refurbish Howard. If we were going to recommend anything, we would really want to look very detailed of what it's going to cost. A lot of the concerns that were voiced by the council about, and Stephanie had talked to me about that it fit the community and that not interfere and not cause problems and it solve more problems, and all of that we would be concerned about, as I know you are. So that really that's where we are. That's the members of the council that were there, or other people could add on. Like I said, it was 2.5 more hour meeting with a whole lot, and this is kind of my summary of the highlights that I think you'd be most interested in.
Jerry.
And just to confirm, they first talked about the PUF, for example, would fall under OSHPOD, so the licensing for something like that would require state approval. It's a longer process. There was, when Camille Schrader from Redwood, Redwood Quality Management, they also run Redwood Children's Services. They currently run the mental health component right now as a contractor. She had talked about this multi-stage facility. They actually got a grant. She showed a mock-up, and they kind of stopped midway because this was before Measure B, and they were waiting to see what the will of the county was. The idea with that if that were to be built, and they said it would be, assuming that today they agreed to it, it would still be 2 years out before that facility would be up and running in the form they envision. That they currently offer day treatment, walk-in services over on Gobi Street. Or folks from here could go down there, or et cetera. The idea would be that in order to make this sustainable, what she had talked about is they would take that day treatment place and co-locate it there, so there could be some of their support services like substance counseling and some of that located there. And they also explained a little bit about Medicare funding. I think the county folks explained that Medi-Cal funding that has to do with how many days you're there and how much they pay, et cetera. And so the different licensing could occur in that one spot. Somebody from the audience asked, could that be a PUF? They kind of explained that's a kind of a different thing. The idea is that you could go there and basically not get bad enough you need to be hospitalized. Maybe all you need is some treatment before you get there. Maybe you need to talk to somebody in substance abuse. And that they wanted to make it clear that that was not going to replace a PUF, that maybe the need for a PUF is still there, but that this facility could divert a lot of the folks that currently get bad enough and end up having to need a hospitalization. Maybe with the intense services that would be provided, they could decrease the need for the psychiatric lockdown facility. But they also talked about money, and that in order to make a PUF viable, because they also handed out some paperwork, and I'll try and pass it out to you guys later on, I'll send it through Kathy, that they gave out that the amount of usage currently and how many people are going out of county, that in order to make a PUF viable, they would probably have to open it up and bring people from out of county into our facility if we built one, in order to, because we couldn't fill it constantly ourselves. So that's something else. And again, nothing was set in stone, and they want some more information from Redwood quality management folks, but and there's still, I think, more to be discussed.
Right, and just to add on to that, when Jason Wells, CEO at Howard, spoke, he said they're again, Adventist Health is interested in looking at the possibility of psychiatric beds in one of their hospitals. But he said, number one, if that was decided that that was what was recommended, and the Board of Supervisors approved it, and they said, yes, let's put some money. He said it would probably take 6 years, given the kinds of regulations that Jerry mentions, to actually do that. So that's kind of the bind of anything that is of this higher level has a lot more regulations, there's a lot more concerns. So kind of the last thing I would say that related to that is the feeling, though, that there is a need for that. As I said, we're already paying for it, by sending people out. So it's not like we're not paying for it now. We're just paying for it to other counties, and other counties are getting the benefit and getting the federal match that comes from it. And our patients, our friends, our neighbors are getting sent out of the county. So I think the consensus was that, strategically finding the right place, the best place, the way to do it is going to be important. And the other thing, just financially, that touches on this is that in these short-term facilities, if you're treating them and there's limits on how many days that, Medicare, Medi-Cal, if they get to the limit of the days and they still need longer-term treatment, and you would want to send them somewhere, but you can't, because it's hard to get people in even out of county. And there's a lot more need from the counties than there is, beds to do. So if you can't accommodate the people and they're still in your facility, longer term, you are paid for it, the you being the taxpayers or Measure B or whatever. So there's some real need to have a facility for long-term people, because this won't solve all the problem for the need for long-term care, but it would help, and it seems like a good place to start.
So I know there's Sabrina and Larry and then Ron would like to say something. Right, we will be opening this up to the public as well, so let's try not to get too deeply into it until we've also heard from the public, but please go ahead, Sabrina.
No, both Jed and Jerry answered several of the questions that I had. Did they discuss that with the PUF unit, if the county did decide to accept outside beds, was there any discussion of a potential policy about Mendocino County first, or the number of months they could potentially
I don't think they got
stay?
that deep into it, did you?
Well, but that's been discussed in a couple of things, because I've been, one of my other jobs is I do the psychiatric reports for long-term care for people who need a public guardian. And so anytime you send somebody to any facility, the facility decides what the terms of you're sending them. So if we had a facility, we, meaning the county, whoever runs the facility, would say, in order to come, you have to do this. You have to bring them here, you have to pick them up, they can't just be on the streets. There's guidance that the facility decides on. So,
We're just curious to hear, as the county moves along with that process, what those guidelines are
well,
going to be.
exactly. Our
And then-
county would decide what, including, some of the concerns that people have about, not wanting people, to be released on the street. Of course, we would, I think it would almost go without saying that it would have priority for people in our county, and we would only ask, make it open to people from outside if we decided that was a viable choice and would help keep our facility running and make it viable financially. If we filled it up, that would be great. We wouldn't need to have anybody from outside the county.
Larry, and then Ron, and then we'll open it up.
The thing that has always interested me is how much money that it's going to cost to employ the people that are going to work at it. And they've never discussed that, and that's been something that is, I think, going to be just a huge part of it. Then the other thing is that with this unit, there's a number of cases that happen over on the coast area, and they would think maybe of doing something over there, but on a smaller scale. But so there's a lot of things being discussed, but I was very interested today to hear what they had to say with the facility that they're talking about in Redwood Valley, and that seemed to be a really good item. It was a step, I thought, in the right direction, I'll put it that way.
I think he's talking about the Redwood management in Ukiah.
Oh, in Ukiah.
Yeah.
Okay.
They have a Redwood, I guess they're leasing some space in Redwood Valley.
Temporarily.
But they had a quick discussion as to whether or not could that be open there instead of waiting 2 years to get this other place built.
Okay, got it. Okay, Ron.
So on the financial aspect of the thing, you had said that the county is collecting about $500,000 a month, which comes out in 5 years to $30 million.
Right.
And according to the Kemper report, as I recall it, it was mandated that no more than 75% of that money can be used for the building of a facility. I may have the number off a little bit, and there was something like 25% had to be used for the operation.
Right.
So that leaves about $22.5 million for the facilities itself. And at this point, does anybody have any vague idea how much anything is going to cost, any of the stuff that you've been talking about tonight?
I'm not sure what you mean. For
These facilities that you're talking about, that you've mentioned that are being thrown around, does anybody have any idea how much any of that is going to cost?
Well, the short answer is yes. The Kemper report, who did a fairly detailed thing, has a very detailed financials that in fact says how much they think each of those things, the crisis, for instance, I'll give you this as the Kemper report. They're saying that the crisis residential treatment, that's the CRT, would cost $4,750,000
To build?
to build.
Okay.
The crisis stabilization unit would be $2 million. A psychiatric health facility would be $7,500,000. So that's based on what their studies. We, of course, when we're looking at anything specific, like in our case, we're looking at this Redwood management specific facility, we said, well, we want to see exactly, the breakdown specifically of this facility, what would it cost? If we were going to recommend funding, we want to know how much exactly we'd be recommending, and you got to tell us what it's going to cost to build it, and how much it's going to cost for the staffing, and all those details that I think any responsible agent would want to know before you recommend its funding.
Okay, and I've read in the paper over the past weeks that some of these amounts have been questioned by various people in the county, saying that they're underestimated, they're not based on current building costs and that sort of thing. So I guess my core question is, if you're going to have, let's say, no more than $22 million available to the building of the facilities, and it turns out that the facilities that are envisioned by the committee and ultimately by the Board of Supervisors, it turns out to be more than that, what's going to happen?
Well, one, that's part of why we're being as careful as we can, and we're not the financial body, we're just the recommending body. But we want to be as careful in our recommendations, so we want to get as accurate numbers as we can. So that's one thing that we're hoping that question doesn't come up, that we're accurate, and if they say they can build it for this, that they actually can build it for that. One thing is, we know in any building of anything, there's potential things nobody anticipates. And in the Measure B recommendations is that there be a fund, a certain percentage set aside for those kinds of potential overrides that nobody could anticipate. So that's one way of protection. The other is that, well, two others. One is that after 5 years of the half-cent sales tax, the measure says that it drops down to an 8-cent sales tax a year, and that's a substantial amount of money. Take, it's a quarter of that a year that then keeps being raised from taxes that would potentially be used for ongoing funding and for potential issues that would come up. So
That's supposed to be, no, that was supposed to be used only for operating expenses.
Well,
That's in the measure.
That's correct.
But that's it, only for, not for whatever
no,
comes
not for
up.
building or
And not for whatever comes up,
Well,
specifically for operating expenses.
Exactly.
For staff.
right.
Okay.
So I mean, I guess, this has been my nagging point ever since this thing first came up, is why wasn't all this done before we even went out for the tax measure? I mean, it's very likely that we're going to need $50 million to do all the things we want to do, and it just seems like it's backwards that all this is happening before we even know if we can afford anything.
Well, I hear you.
All right, let's hear from the public.
I just want to note, Ron, that if you add up the 7,
Yeah, I know, it's about
That's all.
$13
okay, you still got an
million.
$8 million buffer there,
Yeah.
according to the Kemper report. That's a pretty large buffer.
Yeah.
Okay, let's open it up to the public, and I'm sure we'll continue our conversation back and forth. Yes. And, yeah, you just come up in whatever order, as soon as one person
Is
is
this order
done.
good enough?
Yes, I was just going to suggest that other
Clear
people.
camera off, and I've attended all the meetings and watched all the videos, and I'd just like to add a few things to Jed's excellent report that focuses more on Willits. And number one is all the discussions about what's thought to possibly happen in Ukiah, and the discussions about what the hospitals would like to be involved with. None of them include the PUF unit, which is the unit for incarceration and lockdown and people who may be a danger to our community. These are all seen as, before all that happens, an intervention early on in hopes that mentally ill people will receive some treatment early on and not be able to not make that next step into the police picking them up. And that is something that the entire committee, at least 10 out of the 11 of them, immediately bought into and thought was an excellent idea. And the PUF unit being a whole other operation and being the last step, because even though Sheriff Allman felt very strongly that this was the first step, because his issue, and he made no bones about it, was his deputies are stuck with these mentally ill people that they don't know how to deal with, and he wanted a place for them. But all the mental health professionals that attended this meeting, other than Tom, felt that the early intervention, the things that Jed was talking about, and furthermore, like the mobile unit they talked about, local intervention in towns, would greatly reduce the need for this lockdown unit. And in fact, the estimate of $7.5 million to build one, which added, by the way, a 25% cushion, was about half of the estimate that Howard Foundation's estimate was for Howard Hospital, the old Howard Hospital. And that's one of the reasons is because it's half the size, because they don't anticipate needing a building all that large for Mendocino County. And if they had a building that large, in order to fill it up, they would have to go to Allen County patients, inmates. But to make one comment about what Mr. Diamond said, he said part of it, and he said this at the last meeting, to make sure that whoever brings these people into a PUF unit, which we're talking about people who may be in danger, or homeless people are brought in from elsewhere, that they would have to pick them up, that they would have not to leave them on the street. Well, according to the mental health people and the laws in Mendocino County, that can apply to patients who come in from out of county. The county can have a contract with other counties, so that's done. But for any patients brought into Mendocino County, who live in Mendocino County, brought to wherever this PUF unit is, and dropped off and locked up for anywhere from 23 to 72 hours, according to what the county says, when they are no longer being required to be kept against their will, if nobody picks them up, they can walk right out the door. There is no requirement whatsoever in county for anybody to come get them. And so we're faced with a situation where, according to Ms. Schrader, Camille Schrader said that between 1/3 and 40% of the people who are being seen are homeless, and there's nobody to pick them up. And so it's something to consider when you're thinking, where does a PUF unit go? But the bottom line is this committee feels very strongly, and Jerry was mentioning this, that if they spend this money on intervention early on and on these lower serious grade of what they're planning for, possibly for Orchard Avenue and for what the Adventist hospitals are thinking, that the PUF unit will become less and less needed and make for better health for everybody concerned. I thought it was a very positive word. And they felt like Howard Hospital, which is what we're all here about, was still, something we're truly not near there, because they really don't know where their priorities are. That they feel like the priorities should be earlier on to save these people early on. It was really good to hear them say that. Of course, we all know that Sheriff Allman didn't agree with them. He made no bones about it today, but he is a very elegant man. A lot of respect for him. And he respected what they had to say.
Thank you.
Thanks.
We should be doing the 3-minute limit on these.
Sorry, I was writing.
I think you were very.
I will come next meeting.
No, but you were. Even though we didn't have the timer on you, I think you were pretty close to the 3 minutes. So, but in general, that the public comments are 3 minutes. So, other folks that want to address these issues for us? Yes, John, come on up.
John Haschek. I also went to the meeting today, and I was going to add about those the mental health crisis units that they talked about, and Jed didn't talk about it, but Bear did. And I think that increasing, they're going to look at the cost for increasing those, and they didn't have the numbers today, but I think that that's very important to providing services up in this area and other areas throughout the 3rd district of getting those services at a low cost, where a person from the sheriff's department and a mental health worker can go out in a van or something.
So those are CITs, crisis intervention teams.
And they can meet the people where they are in their homes or wherever. it without getting to the hospital. So that seems like a good avenue to pursue. And also, to Ron's question about the cost, you know, there was discussion about the prevailing wage and that the Kemper report didn't take into consideration a lot of the prevailing wages that exist in the county. And so those costs for plumbers or electricians would be a lot higher than was put into the report. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. So other folks from the public would like to address us about this. Anybody? Seeing no one else, maybe we'll bring it back up here. And we're not really taking any action. We're just hearing the status of things, but I think this was extremely helpful. Do you have some other comments?
I just wanted, and maybe the lady that was the behavioral health, what was the group that she's with, behavioral health?
Yeah, there's Behavioral Health Advisory Board.
Thank you.
Which is one of the representatives of the 11 that's on there, which represents the Behavioral Health Advisory Board, and they're a state mandated board that looks at all of these things. So they are on our board. They met, they had their own look at the Kemper report. So that's
and
who
she
they
had
are.
some of the information which I'll pass on to you, to everybody here. But
Yeah, that's some very good information.
Yeah, she did, and she's also spoke regarding the crisis intervention teams. She's the one who.
Yeah. So the crisis intervention teams are not a facility, it is actually.
It's a mobile team that goes out.
Yeah.
Yeah, there currently apparently is one, or is that correct?
I think so, yeah.
Yeah.
They're talking about
Sounds like a
having
great
more.
idea.
So.
Other comments from up here?
Just that I really appreciate those of you who have taken the time to go to the meeting. And I thought tonight we got a very thorough report with some optimistic options for what could happen in our community.
Well,
Thank
thank
you.
you all for continuing.
Can
support.
I have a question, Jed?
Sure.
I think it's for you. And that is, you have the crisis stabilization unit, which is just a 24-hour kind of assessment and kind of stabilize somebody that's in need of a quick assessment and sort of calming them down or whatever. And then you have the crisis residential unit, which can be up to 3 months long.
I mean, I may have misspoke about that. That I was reading from up to 3 months is the generic crisis residential facility. I don't think the one they're recommending is that long. It's much shorter. It's, in days, not 3 months worth.
So those are both levels of assistance to people that is below the level of the PUP unit.
Right.
The PUP unit is more of what I'm hearing, lockdown, pretty serious, people that are a danger to themselves or to others. And that's.
And need longer term care and can't be stabilized, at a
So-
lower level of care.
I know that the Kemper report didn't assess the suitability of the Old Howard Hospital for that whole range of things, but is it my understanding that their primary, or maybe it's Sheriff Allman's vision is that would be a PUP unit, or at least partially a PUP unit?
Well, I can't speak for the sheriff, as I pointed out to everybody, and I think anybody that's been to the meetings recognizes this, is that there are 11 people on the board. We all vote, and nothing gets passed unless a majority agrees with it. And I think if you've been to any meetings, like you'd agree with me, is that no one member dominates and says, here's how it's going to be, and people go along. I mean, we're pretty outspoken, so, I think that the feeling was, both the Kemper report and it's been discussed, is that if there is a need for an additional psychiatric health facility, one, there's a number of options that we would look at, and that number of types of options, from a present hospital to either freestanding or the Old Howard being a potential, but all of those would be looked at real carefully before any recommendation was made.
Do you have an idea how long the committee foresees spending on putting together a recommendation to the board on these options?
Well, no, I mean, the short answer is no. Some members wanted us to go very quickly. If you were at the meeting, I think certainly the sheriff was hoping that we would make some recommendations right away, and I think the consensus of the committee was we'll take whatever time it takes to make good recommendations.
Okay, good. Thank you. All right, well, that was a very informative discussion. And it really has been changing a lot as the months have gone by. Sort of, a few months ago, it looked very different than it does now. And I really like the idea also of the, providing the levels of care before you resort to the hospitalization. Okay, great. So now we are moving.
Thanks,
Yeah,
Jed.
thank you, Jed. All right, we're going to move to the enactment of ordinances, and we do have the various changes to the Willits zoning ordinance, and I think Dusty Dooley is going to make a report.
Yes, good evening, Madam Mayor, council members, Dusty Dooley, your city planner. Yeah, this is, the matter before you is a recommendation to formally adopt ordinance amendment 2018-03. This is an ordinance that proposes some significant and important changes to our zoning ordinance related to accessory dwelling units, supported and transitional housing, single-room occupancy units, farm worker housing, emergency shelters, residential care homes, mixed-use development, housing for individuals with disabilities, density bonuses, and a number of other measures to promote low-income housing opportunities within the city. This matter was introduced to the council at the August 22nd, 2018 meeting, and as required, we're bringing it back to you for formal adoption. You do have recommended action, which is to waive the second reading and adopt the ordinance tonight. And what I failed to also put in there is that we need to adopt the negative declaration that was prepared for the project pursuant to CEQA. You have the updated agenda summary report in front of you tonight, as well as the staff report and the other attachments that were provided at the previous August 22nd meeting.
Jim, do we need to have two separate motions, one on the CEQA question and one on the ordinance, or can we do it all in one?
We could separate them out. Why don't we do the CEQA vote?
All right, let's open the hearing first. Unless anyone has any questions about the just the CEQA categorical exemption, is that what it is?
We're going to do a negative declaration.
A negative declaration, okay. Any other questions of Dusty about that? And we'll open if anyone would like to address the council regarding our compliance with the California Environmental Quality Act and deciding to do a negative declaration that says this is not going to have a significant impact on the environment. Anybody? If not, how about a motion from the floor?
I'll make the motion.
I'll second it.
All right, moved and seconded. Any other questions here? So this is regarding
The negative.
approving that it's a negative declaration. So I guess roll call vote.
Councilmember Gonzalez.
Yes.
Stransky.
Yes.
Weinstein.
Yeah.
Rodriguez.
Yes.
Mayor Strong.
Yes. Now we're going to go to the actual ordinance, and I think Dusty already kind of introduced it, and we talked about it a few weeks ago. And it's a lot of stuff in there. Should we open the hearing? Anybody want to address the council regarding this? Thank you. Come on.
I don't.
Please don't take the mic.
Oh, well.
I thought maybe you were going to have a comment.
Got excited.
Yeah.
No, go for it.
No wonder the people are gathering outside.
For a change, you might have something to say.
I want to do, but I don't.
Okay, nobody want to address us on this ordinance?
I'll move to adopt the ordinance
And to waive the formal reading.
and to waive the formal reading. Actually, no.
I'll second it.
Okay, so you did move the whole
Yeah,
summary.
yeah.
Moved and seconded. Any discussion up here?
I think we discussed it thoroughly last time.
Okay, then another roll call vote, please.
Yes, Councilmember Gonzalez.
Yes.
Stransky.
Yes.
Weinstein.
Yes.
Rodriguez.
Yes.
Mayor Strong.
Yes. And the reason it's so breezing through like this is because we have such good staff work. Thank you very much, Dusty. Good. All right, we now have consent calendar, which is 2 sets of council meeting minutes, and a resolution to award a contract to LACO Associates for general service, engineering services to support our city in-house staff, and a resolution on a contract to SHN Consulting Engineers for soil testing and analysis. So does anyone want to pull any of those items?
Actually, I just want to ask a quick question, so I don't know if I need to pull it.
I think you can go ahead and do that.
On item C, the SHM, that's the one for some of the streets, right?
Yes.
I guess my question is, do we notice some problems in those areas there, and is it more for paving purposes, or do we want to know before we start paving or digging up the street what we have to look at? That was my
Exactly. We have some areas on some streets that have some subsurface problems, and we want to do some soil samples there so we can get recommendations for a treatment to stabilize the road when we go into to pave.
Okay.
Any other questions before we move for a vote?
No, Jerry asked my question. I was thinking of, for example, on Mendocino Avenue, how we have that one hole and it keeps sinking underneath. Would this kind of study prevent that sort of thing from potentially happening in the future?
Yes, there's certain locations that we've selected where we've observed ongoing problems. So those streets are being addressed by this work.
Would that potentially also find like some utility issues? I know that Mendocino, a couple of years ago, there was an old storm drain that they didn't know, and I guess the bus came around and sunk down, versus I think a couple of years ago, and Larry, I think you might remember that when they paved up on Mill Creek, they discovered there was no base rock or something. Yes. And that was the problem that they were having up there.
Yeah, we're pretty confident that old utilities aren't an issue in these locations. There's a potential that there may be a fault issue on Bechtel, and there's some subsidence happening on the south end of the Blosser Lane Bridge. So we're trying to identify what the problem is there, but we're pretty confident that it's related to some subsurface, either the way that the road was formed, or it's a geological.
Oh, okay. And then that'll help you guys in dealing with, I guess I don't want to waste any pavement. I'd hate to pave and then come back and
Exactly.
tear it up.
We want to prevent this problem from
I think
reoccurring.
maybe we're getting into having this one be pulled just because we're.
Oh, I'm good at this point.
I see Ron's hand up too, and I want to make sure we stick with the rules of consent calendar here. Is it okay to have a little discussion?
Well, maybe the discussion is now over with. If it's not, if we anticipate.
Yeah, it's an agendized item, and there are questions to be answered.
So let's pull it.
Okay.
So the only question I have to ask is, are you pretty confident that all of these potential issues on the city streets have been considered, or do you think there might still be more that you weren't able to pinpoint?
These are certain areas that we're looking to do improvements in over the next few years. So we looked at those streets in particular.
It's not all streets.
Not all streets.
Okay, so it's not necessarily a comprehensive citywide thing. There could be more coming up in the future.
Yes.
Okay, thank
And
you.
I think this will probably
Right.
be good for a
2
while.
years, okay. So having had a little bit of a discussion, we'll leave that item in the consent calendar. Does anyone in the public want to address these consent calendar items? And if not, we will, there is money involved, so we will have a roll call vote again.
So move.
Oh.
I'll second.
Move, second,
Thank
good.
you.
Thank you. Follow the form. Roll call vote.
Councilmember Gonzalez.
Yes.
Stranson.
Yes.
Ornstein.
Yeah.
Rodriguez.
Yes.
Mayor Strong.
Yes. Okay. There were some information reports, but do not require any action. Just so everybody knows, if you make a decision that you object to, until you have legal grounds, there are appeal procedures that you can go to. We are not meeting as any other commission or agency tonight. We're just meeting as City Council. Our city manager has just attended a training back east for city managers, and we have our assistant city manager, Kathy. Do you have any reports?
I just have a couple items really quickly. As most of you can see, we've started our ADA bathroom project that has been blocked out now since last week. They are working as quickly as they can to get it done, which will be really nice. I never realized how big a deal it was going to be to not have a restroom out front. We're hoping within the next 2 weeks they'll have that completed. So moving forward with that. The Falling Out of Summer concert series has started. We had our first concert last week with a hometown boy. It turned out really well. We had approximately 100 to 150 people there. I thought it turned out really well. Everybody seemed to have a good time, low key. And our next one is tomorrow night. So we're hoping that everybody attends. It'll be a little bit more upbeat. Double Standards from Ukiah is playing. They've played several wineries throughout the county, and so we're looking forward to that. Last thing I have is an update for the airport and the emergency services folks that have taken over our airport for almost the last 2 months have left. They all left last weekend. So the airport is back open, up and running, and our tenants are very happy about that. And we'd like to thank them for all their support and understanding why all that was going on, because it was a big deal. You know, they couldn't fly in or out, and they were pretty much grounded. So we'd like to thank them.
Has there been any changes to the airport since, after having hosted them there? Has it changed anything in any way?
Not as of yet.
Okay.
Yeah. And they were all wonderful. I mean, the emergency personnel we had it there, they were great. They did a little cleaning and, you know.
Well, that's a positive change.
It was, yes, it was very cool. It was like, oh, we have all this time. It's like, yeah, go ahead. So that's all I have to see. Thank you.
Thank you, Kathy. So department recommendations, we have one agenda item, and then we'll hear from other departments. So potential adoption of a resolution for professional services to EBA Engineering. Jeanette, give us a report.
I'm Andrea Trincato, engineering technician. I'm here to recommend an award of contract to EBA Engineering for landfill post-closure compliance services for a term of 3 years. The Willits landfill is co-owned by the city and county, and it was retired in 1997. We are currently 20 years into a 30-year post-closure period. During this period, we are required to sample, monitor, and report to the regional board on groundwater and stormwater. In the past, the city has contracted with consultants to prepare the required reports, while city staff has managed the sampling and monitoring activities. Over the last several years, staff resources have changed, and we no longer have the staff to dedicate to landfill compliance. Therefore, we prepared an RFP to outsource or for consultants to provide the landfill compliance services. And the city received 3 proposals. Of those 3 proposals, EBA Engineering was the most qualified, and therefore we're recommending a contract for a not to exceed amount of, it goes by years, but ultimately for the 3-year periods, it's $127,000.
Any questions before we open it up? Nancy going first, then Jerry, then Larry.
Okay, so this is a joint responsibility between the city and the county. Is this the full amount of the contract, or is it the amount that the city is going to be responsible for? Is the county going to participate in it? I mean, how's that going to work out?
This is the full amount of the contract. And I should go on to say that In the proposal, we wanted to look at, one of the main goals of the proposal was to look at auditing all of the requirements and looking to pare down any requirements that are no longer giving us useful data. So the consultant, the selected consultant, would go to the board and say, you know, we've been sampling this particular constituent for 20 years and we no longer are getting any useful data, any hits on this. So, so with reductions, I think that this this amount is like the worst case scenario. There's currently a notice of termination that's pending approval. We haven't satisfied all of the requirements yet of the board, but we're working on that. And once we do that, this contract could be reduced by $10,000 a year. So this is the full amount of the contract, and the county is financially responsible for 50% of it.
Okay, that was really the core of my question. So basically, if we're looking at a contract that's worth $127,000, maybe less if we get this reduction in services, the county is obligated to pay half of that amount.
Yes.
So in essence, we're looking at a $60-some thousand cost.
Yes.
Okay.
Jim?
Actually, more question for Jim. So this would be, it's been a while, I guess, since, I don't think I've ever read the contract with the county. So this is something you are.
I just looked at it yesterday, and the city and the county went into an agreement in 1992 for the operation of the landfill. And it recites that the land is owned equally by the parties, some 335 acres, and the parties are equally obligated to pay for the expenses of it. But the city is basically the manager. The city was to handle the day-to-day operations and provide accountings to the county, and the county would just basically reimburse the city for the county's share.
So there's no mommy may I provision in the
No, the city has full authority
okay.
in the management of the facility.
And at some point we send them a bill then and
Right.
okay.
Has that been being done on a regular basis?
Is what being done?
Billing the county for their half?
It was Susie Holmes did it before she left, and the county had some questions about the budgeting process, and we're getting back to them. Presently, the county owes the city, I believe, for some past years' expenses, but has asked the city for backup information to justify the expenses, and we need to get them that information.
Thank you. Larry?
That was my question. If, as the county hasn't really participated for a number of years and they're part of it, what's going to happen at the end? And Andrea, you said there's about 10 years left on the contract. If the county doesn't come through with their part of it.
I just spoke with your manager this afternoon, and I recommended that she and I go to the county offices and meet with the county council and Carmel Angelo and discuss this contract and the current phase that we're in, this post-closure phase, and one thing I want to consider is that there's some surplus land that isn't serving anybody. I don't know how many acres the actual landfill consists of, but there are hundreds of other acres that have nothing to do with the management and the closure of the landfill, and could be sold off as surplus property and could create some revenue that would help pay for some of these expenses. And so that's one thing I want to talk to the county about. And about 10 years ago, the parties talked about this, but it never happened. So I know there was interest on the county's part several years ago to do this, and I think that's a good possibility of coming up with an agreement to sell off the land as surplus land and to fund these operations.
Okay.
Sabrina, did you have?
No, I think you asked my question.
Okay. All All right, so.
I'm sorry, can I just add that the landfill occupies about 18 acres of the 355 acres.
Well, not very much. So I don't know if we already opened the public hearing, but I will make sure we do it right now. If anyone has any comments regarding this item. Seeing no one from the audience, we'll bring it back here. We've already had a little discussion. I think we're ready for a motion.
I'll move staff's recommendations.
I'll second the motion.
So moved and seconded, and have a roll call vote.
Yes, Councilmember Gonzalez,
Yes.
Janicki,
Yes.
Ornstein,
Yes.
Rodriguez.
Yes.
Mayor Strong.
Yes. Okay. So we now have a different format in our agenda, and instead of listing all different departments, we just ask for them. So does anyone from administration, and if not, public safety, do you have any report?
I have nothing.
Okay, community development. John and or Dusty, do you have anything to?
Yeah, I think John will do it first.
Okay. Oh, and then human services, or human resources.
Hi, Mayor Strong, council members, Karen Stevenson, HR analyst. I want to introduce Christopher Morgan. He is our new building official, code enforcement officer. He came on board on Monday, comes well received from the city of El Centro, and we're very excited to have him. So I wanted to go ahead and let him tell you a little bit about himself.
Welcome.
Good evening, Madam Mayor, council members. I'm excited to be here. This is my third day. I'm enjoying the weather. Where I came from, it's desert and it's extremely hot, so this is welcoming to me. The scenery is beautiful. I'm excited to begin to serve the needs of the city of Willits and Mr. John Sherman. He is transitioning me to have a smooth transition, and I appreciate what he's doing for me. Typically, you're just thrown in these situations and sink or swim, so I have a unique opportunity that is rare that he's stayed on to assist me to make sure it's a smooth transition. So I'd just like to say I'm happy to be here, and you'll be hearing from me quite regularly, I would assume, and vice versa. So it's nice to be here, and thank you for receiving me.
So just to be clear, you are the building inspector, correct?
Building official and code enforcement officer.
Oh, and code enforcement. I thought we were going to split them out.
We haven't done that as of yet.
Okay. Good. Welcome aboard.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Very much.
Yes, ma'am.
Your name, it passed by so quickly, I didn't get your full name. What is it?
Christopher Morgan. Chris is fine.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah,
Welcome.
welcome.
Thank you. Any other questions?
Glad you.
Thank you.
Okay. All right. Yeah, Dusty.
I just want to say, Willits, I think, is lucky to get Mr. Morgan to come work for us. Not only does he have the skill set, but almost important, I think he has the right attitude to be a real good fit for Willits. And boy, I was really nervous for the city to fill that position. And meeting Mr. Morgan has certainly put me at ease, and I think a lot of other people as time goes on. So really glad to welcome Chris to the city of Willits family. You guys have a really talented staff that I'm lucky enough to be part of, and it's unfortunately it's kind of rare to have a staff like that, but then we also actually get along and enjoy hanging out with each other and are certainly dedicated to the city. A lot of us either grew up in Willits or as far away as Kokolo. So a lot of folks may have noticed that Caltrans has grinded down a good part of the portion of Main Street that's eventually going to be relinquished back to Willits. And that's led to some increased calls to the Community Development Department and maybe to the ears of the council members as well. Folks are, again, interested in what's the new striping going to look like? What are we doing? And the council, certain council members remember December 16th, 2016, we adopted the Main Street Corridor Enhancement Plan. This plan, amongst other things, identified the restriping of Main Street. And I also want to mention that that plan won an award from the state, and we're the smallest jurisdiction to ever win awards. I want to keep shouting out Willits for a job well done. But yeah, we're sticking to that plan that the then council unanimously adopted. And so Caltrans has integrated that striping plan into the pavement project. So we will see a bike lane on either side of the road. In certain places, you will see a turn lane removed. In downtown, the parking will remain. Where you will see a loss of parking due primarily to the bike lane is towards after you get past the post office and you start heading to Mariposa and out to Highway 20. It's white paint. As we stated back in December of 2016, if we don't like it, we can change it. But we decided to go ahead and try something different. So that's what will be happening. And they're slated to finish the project around the middle to last week in October.
Yes.
So,
And Ron and then Larry.
So Caltrans has told us on numerous occasions, and me in private, discussions, that their intention this year is to do a seal coat, and then they're going to come back next year with I think it's repair or maintenance funds, because they ran out of money on this project. So next year they're going to come back and put a surface on it.
Yeah,
Is that still?
That was the plan for a while. But what's changed is they were really ahead of schedule on the sidewalk work. And so it opened up the opportunity to get the full pavement, not just a quick fix to last the winter and then come back and do the real job next year.
Okay.
This is the real job, and they're slated to end it in
Cool.
October.
So that'll take care, because I've noticed driving down the street, there are a lot of unusual depressions. I sort of thought it was going to be a whole smooth concrete surface, but there's a lot of depressions in the way. That'll all get filled up and.
It better if they want.
Yeah.
Us to take care of it.
Okay, so we're looking at a finished product by the end of this season.
Right. No, that's not a permanent move to try to slow down traffic.
Not a bad idea.
Right.
Thank you.
Sure.
Yeah, they're doing it much sooner than we had originally thought they would.
Well, I thought it was a money situation, though, that they
No, well,
didn't have enough
they
money to do
managed
this.
It was at
figure it
one
out.
point, and they were actually able to pull the pavement work and have it funded under a different,
Yeah.
anyways.
Larry has.
It was all a
another
benefit for
there.
us.
And we've started to negotiate the difference in the thickness of the paving. Is that still going on, or is it, what's happening with
What the
that?
relinquishment agreement says is that their experts would do an evaluation of the road, and then that study would result in the pavement design for us. That study was completed recently. That information was shared with staff, the results of that study, a couple weeks ago. In general, we agree that it's a good pavement plan. We did have a few questions, and we've provided a letter to Caltrans, and we'll await their response. But it certainly was a better pavement design than was initially conceived, going back years of discussion. So, but it has been reviewed by our engineers, including Jeremy and Rod Wilburn, our acting city engineer, and there's a certain level of comfort with it.
Okay, and the one question that I get asked the most is, are we going to have a turn lane on Commercial and the highway?
So, Main Street and Commercial, you will have a pocket turn lane.
Okay.
And then the Highway 20.
No, this is down here.
Yeah.
This is the one I get asked about because.
There's no restripe. The restriping will occur from Main Street intersection with Highway 20 to Main Street intersection with Sherwood Road. Everything north of Sherwood Road on Main Street will remain the same.
But there'll be turn pockets for Main Street to turn left into Commercial either direction?
Correct.
I think that was the question there.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
So final relinquishment date, has that changed at all, or are we still looking at next year?
The Sherwood project, I believe, is part of the relinquishment, and that's slated to finish up early next summer. And so we're not anticipating Caltrans going to the CTC to get a resolution to give it back to the city until after the Sherwood project's completed. So
So potentially not till after the 4th of July, or do you?
I think the last update I'm aware of was that the Sherwood project would wrap up in June of next year. So sure, July, August, something like that. Okay. And then there's a 60-day period though from when CTC, California Transportation Commission, approves the relinquishment. They go get the documents recorded at the county clerks, and then we wait 60 days for the actual for us to take back ownership.
Whether it's ours or theirs still.
Yeah, it's going to be close. But I guess I'm thinking it's still going to be theirs.
Did you have one?
Yeah, my good comment. I just wanted to say that I appreciated the quick release for the press release that was put out, updating pretty quickly the information about the changes with what was happening with the roadway. And I know that the people that are social media savvy really, it helped defer a lot of questions because that press release went out so quickly. So thank you.
And the pavement that they are putting on is supposed to be good for at least 10 years. That's the state of good repair definition.
Right. With regular wear and tear, it's supposed to have a life of approximately, well, it's supposed to at least 10 years. And that's loosely what the definition of a state of good repair, which is what Caltrans was on the hook to provide us.
Will they be repairing the concrete sub-base? I mean, I remember in early discussions, they had told us, Caltrans had, that they were just going to overlay the thing and they weren't going to dig down and make sure things are solid and, you know, to make sure we had a solid base that the street was going on. Is that...
I mean, it seems like they've grinded down a significant depth of the roadway, but I'm probably not the qualified person to ask that, sorry.
Are any of our people taking a look at the roadway just to make sure we don't have any sinkholes?
Yeah, our engineering team, including Mr. Wilburn, are present in all of these meetings, and, and everything's vetted through them on our behalf.
My one big question I keep asking, and nobody gives me an answer on it, is somebody going to stop and have somebody from the city look at the stoplights to make sure they're the most up-to-date that we have, that we can get?
There is some information in the relinquishment agreement that they're supposed to bring them up to whatever the current standard is. My understanding is there's going to be like a software update that occurs.
So they are going to do that.
But I don't believe they're replacing and giving us brand new stoplights. We're going to inherit the ones that are there now. But the relinquishment agreement says that.
So does everybody realize on the staff that if it's old hardware in there, that when we relinquish it to us and we have trouble with it, it's going to cost us more money to replace it and to do it than it does if it's brand new?
Yeah, I think we're aware that the old equipment's going to have a higher maintenance cost than brand new. We actually asked for a brand new signal. We were looking, for instance, at Commercial Street, we were looking to have a dedicated left turn signal, which would require a new stoplight, and that request was denied. And honestly, there's nothing in there that really ties them to giving us a brand new one. Their evaluation is that the existing one's fine, that there is some software updates that need to be completed. I'm assuming that they're going to help train some of our folks on the intricacies of maintaining those stoplights. And what we've asked Caltrans for is basically identify their maintenance costs for this portion of Main Street going back a number of years, so that we can have a better idea of what type of maintenance costs we're inheriting, and so that we can properly budget going into the future.
Because
I don't know what the lifespan of the existing stoplight. I haven't seen a study that provides any details to that level.
I have the relinquishment agreement up on my computer that talks about the lights.
Because we're inheriting 200-year-old bridges and an old stoplights, and the newest stoplight is the one up by the high school. And I just think it's a very important thing, and I think we ought to look at it from the point of view that I don't always trust Caltrans.
So
and so consequently, we're gonna buy into this. The only thing that we're going to have is a yay or nay at the end to accept it.
So I'd like to have Jim tell us what it says about.
Okay, so this, I'm reading from the relinquishment agreement that talks about the 2 traffic signals, and it says, the 2 traffic signals within the relinquished facilities are at Commercial Street and Sherwood Road intersections. These signal systems have been maintained and are in good working condition. In the event the standards for traffic signal systems used on state highways are updated by the time the relinquished facilities are superseded by the bypass, or there are components that are in need of replacement, the state will install any required signal hardware and/or software at the 2 locations.
Aren't they going to give us a new set of signals at Sherwood Road? Because they're reconfiguring.
I recall that they have to move the signals to realign with the work that's being done. I'm not aware that we're getting brand new signals though.
Okay. So I think we should have our staff pursue, look at that wording and make sure that if we have a negotiating position with Caltrans, that they have met.
Yeah, I think if the council is concerned that, the evaluation by Caltrans may be slightly off, then I think we were probably an opportunity to hire an independent expert to evaluate the bridges, the stoplights, and certainly if they came to a different opinion, then that would lead to further discussions with Caltrans. But that would something that would have to be authorized by the council.
Yeah, I have another question about the relinquishment. I know that Caltrans had at one point at least expressed the desire to relinquish everything south of the Sherwood Road work as soon as it's finished, and then do this. Is we're not obligated to accept that, are we?
I don't believe so, and I don't think the relinquishment agreement talks about a bifurcated relinquishment process.
Yeah.
The very final, what I'm reading from is Exhibit B, maintenance tasks. It's attached to the relinquishment agreement. And the very final paragraph says, Caltrans has agreed to study the feasibility of developing and constructing a Sherwood Road US 101 intersection improvement project. The project is expected to include a retaining wall approximately 30 feet tall that allows an improved connection to US 101. The Sherwood Road studies are in the preliminary design phase. Caltrans' initial studies indicate that constructing the improvements will be feasible. So at the time this agreement was entered into, they basically said, we're going to look into it, see if it's feasible. We think that it is. And it does. I'm not seeing that they talked about any 2-process relinquishment. And my understanding was that all tasks would be completed.
Yeah, okay.
At the
All
time of
right,
relinquishment.
so I think those concerns should definitely be looked at.
And do we have the right to go through a winter before we accept it? I mean, nobody's talked about that.
So if the Sherwood Road upgrade is part of the relinquishment, which we understand that it is, and they're not slated to finish till next summer.
Okay.
Then.
Yeah.
So we'll go through a winter. Thank you.
All right, good. So thank you very much. Anything else from the community development besides welcoming Chris? Yeah, John.
Good evening, Mayor Strong, council members. I'm just back from 3 weeks away. I took 3 weeks off my life before, so it's been an interesting experience. But I have to tell you, I just want to give a huge thanks to Michelle Johnson, our assistant planner, who handled all of the administrative stuff while I was gone, scheduled the inspections, and then also to Dean Fuller, who stepped in and acted as our inspector. And from what I hear back from everybody, they just did a great job. And I really appreciate it. I was pretty stressed out about the idea of going away for that long. That being said, I've worked for the last 3 days with Christopher Morgan, and I'm really pleased and I'm encouraged, and I think we're going to be doing fine. The last thing I want to mention is that last month, we had somewhat of a record month in terms of evaluation of the projects permitted. I expect I can't say this month because most of it was taken up with me wandering around the country, but between now and the middle of next month, I expect that we will have, again, a record amount of evaluation of work being done. I believe I've got 6 major projects in plan check right now. So activity in Willits is really picking up. And I think things have changed here, and I think it's going to take a little while to see the momentum building, but we're building momentum. And I really think a lot of that has to do with the decisions that have been made by this council. And I want to thank you, and I appreciate it very much. That was a time when I didn't have a lot of hope for the future in Willits, and I have great hope. I almost feel like, wow, this is the wrong time for me to leave. But at the same time, 3 weeks off taught me that I do have another life, and it'd be nice to get to it. I also want to thank the city of Willits for the opportunity of serving in. The last 11 years have been great for me. This place has got a big, big, big place in my heart. And everybody seems to be asking me if I'm leaving town. I'm not leaving town, I'm here. So, thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you.
Thank you, Sean.
Yeah, it's like you're leaving tomorrow. I can only do
Yeah.
that quickly.
And I'm glad you were able to enjoy your 3 weeks without feeling that things were going to fall apart with you being gone. They were my house removed. Trees trimmed, all sorts of stuff. Okay. Public Works and Engineering, anything to report besides what we already did? Okay. So that's for department recommendations and City Council and committee reports. That includes any of the boards or agencies that any of you serve on behalf of the city. So why don't we just go across the dais here and hear any reports that you have from committees that are relevant to what's going on in Willits. Do you have anything?
Nothing since our last meeting, and in fact, I was just notified that LAFCO will not meet on Monday, so I won't have anything regarding that next time.
Okay, how about Larry? Do you have any?
MCOG or none of the other committees that I'm on are meeting, so thank you.
Great.
Nothing. Nothing report.
Wow, I've been busy. I just came from a meeting in Fort Bragg before this meeting, and a couple of things. The MTA board was behind on doing their financial, and so we approved the financials we're a year behind. So we finally did that today, which is a big deal, and so now we're catching up, and we expect that in the next 3 months we'll be completely up to date. Something came up in Willits, and Dusty's been working on this, and I was hoping to relay that information and also maybe get an update from you that there was concern about a bus stop that needed to be removed across from Brown's Corner, and that they were told that it would go before the safety committee. But I'm wondering, when is the safety committee going to meet? Because this bus stop has to be removed in a week, and there are people that are very concerned that they won't be able to catch the bus there. Do we know when the next safety meeting is?
The week of the 15th.
Of October 15th.
Why does it have to be removed in a week?
The property owner wants the bus stop removed, and I guess there's a location that is near Alder Street, but not at, MTA wants to put it near the spot they had before, but not in the exact same spot. And they're going to give me some plans, and I'm sure that if they haven't submitted them to Dusty, that they'll submit them to. Do you want to elaborate on it?
I don't think there's much Just to say that staff has responded. It will be a matter that's going to be scheduled for our pending Traffic Safety Committee meeting. We've alerted MTA that they will need to get an encroachment permit with us, and we're happy to walk them through that process. Then we also likely will need to come before the council with the resolution, because we're probably looking at painting the curb red to support the bus stop. Obviously want to have staff weigh in to see if there's any concerns or ideas, but ultimately we're hoping to certainly support an MTA, a new bus stop. I understand that that's a popular location for them, a valuable location for them, and they're anxious to find a new location, recognizing that this one's about to.
Do you know potentially how long it might take before we could have something in place, provided that they responded quickly to getting the application for the encroachment permit?
So I'm still trying to make sure I understand. This is a new type of project for me, but if it's just a matter of getting an encroachment permit and then bringing a resolution before you folks, for the council, and there aren't any concerns that come up amongst staff at the Traffic Safety Committee, and MTA is able to provide us the information we've requested, we'll likely be back before the council in November.
Okay.
Does that mean there isn't going to be a bus stop there for?
There won't be any bus stop until something is approved. That is there one in front of McDonald's?
Yeah, there's one by Taco Bell.
Taco
So
Bell.
is it southbound or northbound?
Southbound. So McDonald's, Taco Bell, that'll be the last stop.
The closest
That'll
one
be the
heading that
closest one there. And the concern is that you've got the folks from Wagon Wheel and the senior
Right.
center that will have to travel further north to get onto the bus.
No, it's
And
not
so it's a
like-
bit of an
right.
inconvenience, and that's the other problem is it's a popular bus stop, and it is covered. And we do have the rainy season coming up. And so
the
MTA.
covered one is the one that they're going to remove?
Yes, so MTA is very concerned about the loss of this location.
Can they stop for people to either get out and come, and even if the covered thing is removed? I mean,
No.
Why not?
They have to meet certain guidelines, and if the property owner doesn't want people basically standing on his property waiting for the bus, he has that right. And
The sidewalks are public.
I don't know. I don't know the
I know it's a-
intricacies, but I know that they have,
No,
that they can't use that location anymore.
Well, I am concerned
by the
because a
tire
lot of people use
Yes.
that, and that is a popular stop.
Yeah, and then also some community members who have children that are going to Eagle Peak came before me and requested whether or not MTA would be able to provide transportation services from, for example, in front of J.D. Red House to Eagle Peak, and they can't because MTA provides public transportation, but they can't directly provide school transportation. And if that was the purpose of transportation, then that would be outside the scope of what they do. They just made a recommendation that, for example, people catch bus number 20 at 6:53 in the morning, get off at 7:18 in front of the school, or near the school, and walk 2 blocks. But that was the best they could offer. So for those people watching TV, that's your option. All right. And then the next thing I wanted to report on was not necessarily a committee of the City Council, but a community committee, and that is the Visit Willits Tourism Board. Has been very busy. You may have seen the event. We selected a logo, and we've have an event coming up on October 20th called the Wild Willits Fest. We're also busy selecting a logo for the Visit Willits tourism that will identify, that hopefully will become iconic for when you're thinking about tourism for Willits. But going back to October 20th, there's going to be free live music down at the Retro Park for 4 or 5 hours. There'll be food vendors there. There'll be a kids area, a hoedown. There'll be a 5K and a 10K and a half marathon run through the beautiful Little Lake Valley. And there'll be a Taste of the Harvest. So there'll be a pavilion tent. It's $25 to go into the pavilion tent. And there'll be food made from local farmers here in Mendocino County, as well as a taste of some local wines. So I hope you all come out for the event. That's it for that one.
Okay. The two committees that or agencies that I sit on, one of them is the Economic Development and Financing Corporation, and they also have been doing a lot of housekeeping, budget, and accounting, and it's very complicated because they have a lot of loans out, and they have to really account for all of that and pay back some of the funds to the federal agencies that provide funding. They have an opportunity, and they are applying for $1 million grant from, where is it from? In there, a different piece of paper. It's from a federal agency, and there's a certain match. They can use some other grant money as part of the match. So it's really a leverage to get $1 million worth of funds available to loan out. And those are then not, they don't have to ever repay it. They keep revolving that to the community. So again, any of our business people that see the need for some capital to expand their business or to start a new business, EDFC is a good place to go. They are also working with the Broadband Alliance and trying to kind of they're kind of taking control over that aspect of the county's efforts on broadband. And I believe there is going to be an event here in Willits, January 31st, which will be primarily directed at how to improve broadband for all of us, especially out here in the hinterlands that we don't always get that. Tomorrow is going to be the meeting of the Mendocino Waste Management Authority, which is now called Mendo Recycle for short, and that'll be tomorrow at 10 o'clock here in this room. If anyone is interested in what happens to our garbage, it's an important aspect of dealing with public service. Are there any good and welfares to report? Anybody have any?
I do.
Yeah, and I do too.
Okay.
Anybody else?
All right. So October is called Walktober because Walk and Bike Mendocino would like to encourage everybody to get out on their bike and enjoy our community and be kind to the environment. So walk to work, bike to work whenever you can. And then the second thing is in conjunction with what's happening on October 20th. On October 19th is the Downtown Harvest Moon Festival. And so your local downtown merchants are going to be having all kinds of things going on. So don't forget to mark your calendar for October 19th and stop by your favorite local shops and check out what they have, taste food, listen to some music. Visit Mendocino will also be there selling Taste of the Harvest tickets and signing up racers. It's not too late to decide to run a half marathon.
Okay. The Willits Economic Localization Group that I'm also on the board of is really very active with the Paint the Town projects, and there's several different projects going on simultaneously. You may have noticed the trash receptacle that has been painted, and at least one, if not two, of the fire hydrants, of which there are 300 in the city limits. So eventually we're going to have all sorts of colorful and creative paintings going on, and the idea of that is also to make it something that people might want to actually visit Willits just to see all these the trash receptacles and the fire hydrants. Some other people, I think the high school art class is looking at some murals. We're also painting some of the dumpsters when we get permission from both the property owner and the Solid Waste of Willits to do that. And we've also been, we've done the first of several photographs that are hanging in an empty storefront right next to Buster's Burgers. And we hope to have some artwork in every empty storefront that we can get permission to do, either photographs or quilts or potentially painting the glass. And finally, last but not least, we had 2 work parties so far at the corner here of Main Street and West Commercial with those 12 concrete barriers that have been there for over 15 years and look pretty bad. They are almost all now painted with a base coat, and this coming Sunday, starting at 11, we will be painting murals on those, and they're really going to be beautiful. So you can come and help paint. You can just come and notice what an improvement that's going to be. That corner's going to look really nice. Yeah. So those are the reports. I guess we don't have any others, and we do not have a closed session. So yes.
Can I make
John,
an announcement?
yes. Please, you have good and welfare?
John Hester. The Willits Teachers Association and the California School Employees Association and AAUW, the American Association of University Women, are going together to put on a candidates forum for the school board positions. There are 4 school board positions open. There are 7 candidates. And so it's going to be on October 18th, a Thursday, at 6:30 at the Willits High School Alan Garcia Auditorium.
And I almost forgot, but you just reminded me that on October 4th, which is coming up much sooner, there is going to be a forum for the 2 candidates for the Board of Supervisor race in our district, and the 3 people running for the 2 open seats on the City Council. So that is also sponsored by a whole bunch of different groups, but it's a very important time to look at the candidates for those representatives for both the board and the City Council, October 4th and then October 18th. And the one on October 4th will be here at the Community Center at 6:30.
Thank you.
Thank you, John. I'm glad you